Ciao a tutti. Welcome to my 12-week video series on Italian, where I'm going to be starting Italian from scratch and logging all of the tools and tactics that I'll be using along the way. And hopefully you guys can follow along, and maybe some of it will be of use to you in your own language journeys. So I've been wanting to study Italian for last 2 years now. I bought some of the tools that I'm going to be using throughout this series over a year ago, but I was already studying Spanish and Russian, and I wanted to make sure that I got both of those to upper intermediate level before I added a new language. And so I've been putting off the Italian, even though the pressure has been building in terms of my desire to do it. Recently, my Russian tutor stopped giving classes, and so it seemed like a good opportunity now for me to take a little bit of break from Russian after 3 years and to kind of scratch that itch that I've had for Italian. So initially, I'm going to start out with goal of a 12-week sprint, see how far I can get. Of course, I'm not really much of a language dabbler. Actually, in general, when I start to get involved with something, I tend to go hard, and so that'll probably be the case here. And especially, I anticipate that I'm going to really like Italian, and so I'm going to want to continue it far beyond these 12 weeks. But at least initially, that's kind of the goal I set is, okay, let's see if I really, sit down and focus for 12 weeks, how far can I get? And so a bit of my background in terms of language learning is I started studying languages in 2018, at least in a more formal way, about 2 months prior to a trip that I went to Peru. And I used exclusively Coffee Break Spanish, and it turned out to be really great and useful tool. And since then, I studied Korean for about 2.5 years, Russian 3 years, Spanish I've kept up the entire time since I started, but 2019 I was focused a little more on Korean than Spanish. And then, so I do have a background and basis in French and Spanish, so that I anticipate is going to help me a lot with the Italian, at least in terms of the passive vocabulary and all of the cognates and things of that nature, that obviously it's going to give me an advantage versus a monolingual non-Romance language speaker. And so some of the kind of the setup that I'm using for this 12-week sprint is I'm going to break it up into 3 phases of 4 weeks, and I've got my first phase lined out. I also have the second phase lined out, but I haven't touched the third phase yet because, full disclosure, I've already started my first week when I'm recording this video, so I've already made one adjustment to my first phase. So I have the rest of my first phase, I think, outlined now, and that's what I'm going to stick with for the rest of the time. And I have an initial phase 2 lined out, but I haven't touched phase 3 yet. But anyways, each phase will be about 4 weeks. It's the holidays, so maybe one of the phases runs a little bit longer because I'm doing something else and it's not conducive to switching to the next phase. So at least for the first phase, initially my layout was going to be, I was going to use Pimsleur, Coffee Break Italian, because I had a lot of success with Coffee Break Spanish beforehand. Assamil, which is a French grammar book that teaches Italian, which that'll be, I'm going to expand on that more later and maybe in other videos as well. LingQ, which is an app that you use on the phone. I've used it every day for probably close to 3 years now, reading, and I use it mostly to read other books in Spanish and Russian primarily up to this point. And I really like their mini stories series to get started in a language. I think it's pretty effective. Then also Ollie Richards has this series that he calls the Uncovered series. He's got beginner and advanced for Italian along with other languages, and I've bought his books for Spanish, Russian, Korean, and now Italian as well. And I really like the books. I think they're great. You get a lot of bang for buck. They're not expensive. The Uncovered series is definitely a little more expensive, but I wanted to give it a try because I liked his books so much. And when I bought the Uncovered series, it was like a 2-for-1 deal where you got the beginner and the intermediate Italian course. So 2-for-1. And then in phase one, and through all the phases, I'm also going to be passively listening to YouTube videos and podcasts just if I'm working or doing something else where I'm not actively focused on studying, reading, grammar, coffee break Italian, something like that. Then I'll be watching passive videos throughout and podcasts. In the second phase, really the main thing that I'm looking at adding is going to be italki lessons. And this is where one thing where I'm not sure if I'm actually going to add that in phase 2 or phase 3, or maybe even after the 12 weeks, depending on how much progress I make. Because in my opinion, italki and working with the tutor is more effective once you've really got like at least a solid beginner phase where you've got a good feel for the grammar, at least the structure of it. You've got some vocabulary that you can use. And so obviously, since I'm in the first week, I don't know how far I'm going to get at the end of this month or the end of the second month. But the plan is, hopefully at the start of the 5th week, I'll start with italki lessons, working with the tutor on italki, which I've done for Spanish and Russian, and a little bit of Korean as well. And then in the second phase as well, I'm going to start adding, some of these tools like the short stories from Ollie Richards. I used all of you can see them up there, short stories in Spanish from Ollie Richards and short stories and from this Lingo Mastery. And I also got the short stories in Italian and then the Ollie Richards Intermediate. And so I'm going to use those books at least initially in the second phase. And hopefully once I'm done with those, then I can get to real books. Like I've bought the entire Harry Potter series in Italian, and I also ordered some other native Italian books that I saw in one of the YouTube videos from an Italian YouTuber, Lucrezia, something like that. And so, yeah, I'm hoping to transition to real books in phase 2. Coming back to phase 1, so I initially said Pimsleur. Pimsleur and Coffee Break Italian kind of serve the same purpose. I've used Pimsleur with Korean and Russian, and it really helped with my accent because it's just 30 minutes of you just repeating, shadowing what somebody else is saying. But I was finding, because since I've already started the first week of Italian, now that I'm recording this video, and Pimsleur and Coffee Break Italian, because even though they're kind of covering the same thing, Pimsleur's a little more formal while Coffee Break Italian covers the formal language and the informal. And so I found that I was kind of mixing up and confusing the words and phrases from each. So I said, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna cancel out the Pimsleur and use the Coffee Break Italian, which is a shame because I paid for the Pimsleur and it's not cheap, while Coffee Break Italian's free. At least their initial podcast, they have paid material as well, but you can get really far with just their free podcast. That's all I used for prior to my trip to Peru, and it worked out great for me. So the modification that I've made to my phase 1 is that I've canceled out Pimsleur. And so now I'm just going to use Coffee Break Italian for my speaking practice, my pronunciation practice, and those types of things in phase 1. And then my grammar book that I'm using is the Assimile l'Italien. It's a French grammar book, which that's a great tactic that you can use, strategy, when, for instance, if you've got your mother tongue, whatever it is, and then you learned a second language, you can, and if that, of course, that second language has to be very strong, but if you've gotten to a strong intermediate, advanced level in another language, you can use that to then learn your third language. And so that's a way that you can help keep up that second language without necessarily actively studying and dedicating time to that, because you're going to be working on your third language through that second language. And so Assimile it has 100 lessons. It says that, it gets you up to the level of B2. We'll see about that. In 100 lessons. And so, yeah, that's going to be my main grammar book. I'll be using that throughout all 3 phases probably, because I don't anticipate getting done with all 100 lessons prior to the completion of phase 3. Maybe it'll be, sometime in phase 3. We'll see. And then for my phone, so when I'm at the gym, for instance, and between sets, or if I'm doing, cardio, like 20-30 minutes, then I'm going to be using my phone and Link to go through those 60 mini stories. So I'm hoping that I can do, 2 to 3 a day of the mini stories, where I'm going to be running through the story 3 times. Initially, I'm just going to be listening to the audio and reading along. The second pass will just be me reading through the story, clicking on words, seeing what words I know or don't know. And then in the third pass, Link has this sentence by sentence mode. So that's where I'll be getting some extra pronunciation practice, because I'll be able to say the phrase and then I can click the audio and it'll have a native speaker that repeats the phrase. And so I'm hoping that I can maybe get through all of the 60 mini stories in the first phase, so that way in the second phase I can immediately just start going to real books, the short stories in Italian. And then the last tool will be the Uncovered series from Ollie Richards, the Italian beginner series. And so I'm not sure, I'm gonna just try and do as much of that one as I can, and then in the beginner, and then transition to the intermediate. I don't know in what phase that will be. I don't know or think that I'll finish with the Uncovered beginner series in phase 1, because I kind of took a glance at it and it seems like there's a lot of material. So that might bleed into phase 2 a little bit as well. So what's going to be the structure for my weekly vlogs? So I'm planning on having weekly videos showing exactly what I'm doing, like when I'm using the ASIMIL book, what does that look like? What am I writing down? In Link, I'm going to have video and audio of me going through those different stages of reading the mini stories, along with, and of course with Coffee Break Italian and with Link when I'm pronouncing and shadowing, so that way you can hear, oh, how is my accent coming along? Am I improving? In Coffee Break Italian, because they'll have moments where they quiz you, they kind of say, oh, how do you say this? How do you say that? How am I doing with that? And I'll show good stuff, and if I have bad moments too where I kind of struggle, I'll also show that. I'm not going to record every single day. I'm planning on maybe recording twice a week, like once in the middle of the week and once at the end of the week. For the first video, I started with day 1, because I wanted to show immediately, first time never having spoken Italian, immediately starts with Pimsleur, and so you can see how immediately what my accent with no Italian practice, what it sounds like. And then, but for the subsequent series, I'm going to probably do like a Wednesday, Thursday, and then a Sunday recording. So at least I'll get for sure the end of the week and sometime in the middle, because taking the camera around, and it can be kind of impractical to do 7 days of the week. And I noticed that on the first day, because batteries died, and trying to set up the camera in the car and then at the gym and these and other locations, and even at home trying to get used to where should I set up the camera and all of that, it really slowed. I didn't get to do as much as I still did a lot, like 2 hours the first day, but it's just not very effective to do on a daily basis. So I'm aiming for 2 days out of the week to have videos, and you can see, and then maybe on Sundays when I have that second video at the end of the day, when I'm recording, kind of how the week went, I may set a goal of something like trying to speak for 30 seconds, which that's going to be something new for me, because for instance with Russian, I didn't start taking actual classes where I was speaking. I was shadowing and kind of talking to myself. But I didn't actually start classes with a tutor until a year in, exactly a year. I started studying Russian January 2020, and I started italki classes January 2021. And the good news is I had a good accent, at least according to my tutor, and probably due to all of the shadowing practice. But a year was too late, but I tend to, some people are like, oh, speak from day one, and not really in that camp, because you don't really know anything. I mean, I'm a fan of speaking from day one in terms of shadowing, obviously, because I'm going to be doing a lot of that, but I'm not really a fan in terms of trying to necessarily output your own material. But because this is video, YouTube, then audio is a way to gauge my progress. But of course, speaking is only one of 4 components of language learning, along with reading, writing, and listening. And so, my passive abilities, it's going to be hard, maybe a little bit hard to demonstrate improvements in those areas on video, but we'll see kind of what happens. Also, how am I going to be tracking these? So I created a spreadsheet called Italian Plan. I'm going to share it in videos throughout, and then I'll probably, upload it, make it available for download if somebody wants to download it and use it for their own studies, or modify it for another language, but what will I be tracking? So major thing is there are 2 main categories. There's active time, which is reading stories, reading grammar books, studying the Uncovered series, doing Coffee Break Italian, counting all of those types of activities as active activities. But then, so it's going to be tracking active versus passive time. And passive time is maybe, it's playing a YouTube video while I'm working, and so I'm going to track, the quantity of time, or maybe I'm kind of coming in and out where I'm paying a little bit of attention and then I'm not really paying attention. I don't know how much, passive time helps, but just in the interest of completion, I'll be tracking that as well. And then within the active category, I'm going to also track not just the total active time, but also the time spent with each tool. So you'll be able to see each day, and then I'll have a summation for each week, and then a summation for each phase, how much time was spent with each tool, each day, each week, each month, essentially. I'm also going to have a couple of sheets in the spreadsheet. One will be active resources, so like, all of the like the grammar books that I'm using, or the short story books that I'm using. And so it'll have a full list of all the resources that I've used, also the passive resources, the YouTube channels that I like, that I thought were valuable, interesting, or just the time that I spent with each of them. And then also the price that I paid for them, if they cost something, so that we can see, okay, wow, like for instance, Pimsleur, that was a costly mistake on my end, but because I'm going to use the free Coffee Break Italian resource. But my mistake will be your gain, hopefully. And so that's about it for the intro video. And if you have any questions or comments regarding anything that you'd like to see, or something that you'd like me to expand on, just leave a comment below and I'll try to answer them in the future. So thank you, and happy to have you guys along with me. Thanks.